Obviously in here we've talked primarily about what we do with young puppies is almost all the giving and withholding of rewards, right? And so in most cases with puppies, we're trying to build not only an attitude about training and an attitude about us, a relationship with us, but they also don't know anything. And in dog training, one of the most important principles in the use of pressure, and these days we have people putting themselves in certain sorts of training camps, and the reward-based people think that anybody that uses pressure is evil. The escape and avoidance people think anybody uses a clicker is a sissy or whatever, right? And people get really devoted to a certain aspect of training. And one of the knocks on pressure-based training, the use of escape and avoidance training and pressure in our dog training, is that you'll damage your relationship. You can damage the dog's ability to work independently. There's all kinds of things, and there's a fairness component to this. Ultimately, the way punishment works is the dog has to know what to do to make that not happen again. They have to know what they do, clearly know what they need to do to avoid that consequence. And if the dog can very clearly figure out exactly what they need to do to avoid that, then punishment works great. If the dog can't figure it out, then punishment creates stress. It's just like us, right? There are lots of things in our lives that have happened to us that are unpleasant. But if we know what we need to do to avoid them, we have no problem with them. Like, I've been burned while cooking, right? Everybody has. You burned your hand on the stove, you burned your hand on a pot handle, whatever, right? Am I afraid of cooking? Do I stay away from the stove? No, because I'm pretty sure what I have to do to not make that happen in the future. So that's within my control. So it doesn't make me anxious. But if I couldn't figure that out, if every time I went over to the stove it did something different, sometimes the knobs were hot and the burners were cold, sometimes vice versa, sometimes a cooking pot was cold and sometimes the cooking pot was hot, you wouldn't go near the damn thing. You're like, I cannot figure out how this thing works, it changes up on me all the time. And that's definitely the case. There's actually a concept in psychology called perceived control of aversive experiences, right? And they do studies in psychology departments where they have students and they use electroshock on them and they give them a series of questions. And if they know what the answers are, then they perceive that it's in their control. And even if it's not in their control, but in their mind it's in their control, then they have a different physiological response to the same electrical shock than if they felt that it was out of their control. The same electrical shock actually creates a different physiological experience. Their heart rate is higher, their blood pressure is higher, their cortisol levels are higher if they think it's out of their control. If they think it's in their control, they can shock themselves all day long. They can deliberately answer wrong, and they have less of a stress than if it's out of their control in their mind. And this is it in dog training in a nutshell. Anybody that's trained dogs a lot knows this to be true. If the dog feels in control of those aversive experiences, and I think they know what they need to do, then if I correct them, they're less stressed than you correcting a dog that can't figure out what the heck it's being corrected for and how it's going to make that stop. And so with puppies, they don't know anything, ultimately. And so me correcting them for most things isn't fair, and it's going to cause anxiety and stress and damage to our relationship, right? Now, there are some specific things that they can associate. So there are certain types of behaviors that we need to stop at a certain point, whether we want to or not. And it's not perfect, but we gotta stop them. Whether they're self-reinforcing behaviors that will become the dog will become addicted to as they get older, like barking or aggressive responses, whether that's like trying to kill my parakeet or whether it's biting you, right? We talked a lot about redirection for mouthiness, and 9 times out of 10, I don't have to do anything but redirect my puppies and they stop biting you. A couple months down the road, they're biting toys, they leave you alone, you're great. And a significant portion of the puppies, you never have to do anything. Every once in a while, you get a puppy that's really freaking dedicated to biting you. They come flying in and they really grab you and they think that's great fun. And you go, ow, 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 and they go, ha, ha, that was fun, right? And you redirect and redirect and redirect, and they still dig this. So that may be a case where it's a behavior that I have to stop. But it's relatively easy for them to associate the correction I give them for that with what they just did because of the timing. They bite me, I grab them by the cheek and pinch them, and they go, knock it off. And they go, ow! And I say, see, don't do that, it hurt. And they go, yeah, that did, okay, I won't do that, right? And so in that case, I might use an aversive on a puppy. But we want to be careful about it, and we definitely don't use it as it pertains to obedience, like sitting and downing and coming. They have no idea what these things are, and pressure is only going to stress your puppy out, damage your relationship and make them want to avoid the training process. And management is the way that we avoid using aversives. And people that wind up using a lot of aversive on puppies, it's almost always due to a poor management scheme or a lazy management scheme. People get in a hurry, they're like, oh man, I wasn't planning for this. Now you're acting like an idiot, and now I gotta make you stop. Whereas they've been out, where we talked about being prepared, being ready to redirect and things like that. And then there are certain circumstances out in the world. Sometimes I have to put a little aversive on a puppy to redirect them, especially if they're behaving aggressively. So I can have a puppy out at the end of the leash snarling away at another dog, and they're not redirecting with our normal stuff, and I pinch them in the flank or something like that. So they go, ow, and they turn around and I go, we're going this way, come on, right? And they're low-level aversives, but it's not ideal in a perfect world, but it's sometimes we have to get out of a certain situation in those circumstances. My puppy dives on the parakeet, and he's almost got it halfway down. So I pick him up by the scruff and rip it out of his mouth, and that's aversive. The puppy didn't like the fact that I picked him off the ground by the scruff, but the parakeet was going down, and I had to save the parakeet, or whatever it is, right? And so we have a lot of like less than ideal situations, and almost always, not always, if we have younger puppies and I'm using aversives, it's due to that, something I wasn't expecting that happened, and I wasn't prepared, and now I'm using the less than ideal circumstance. So caution here. Especially caution, and we talked about it with our socialization guideline, especially caution when you're talking about fearful puppies and aversives, right? Again, a dog that's afraid of something has a tendency to behave badly. A lot of the stuff that we don't like in dogs is rooted in insecurity and anxiety, barking at other dogs and things like that. And corrections in those circumstances or aversives may stop the underlying behavior, may stop the barking, but it doesn't make the dog more comfortable with the thing they're afraid of, and it frequently makes that pathology worse. And so I always want to try to identify if my dog is behaving badly because they're afraid and address the fear-based part first and see if I can't make it go away by trying to increase their confidence around whatever it is that's making them anxious, right? Which means, of course, me being very preemptive so they don't get to rehearse that bad behavior and as we go. At some point, we may have to stop it anyway, but in the beginning, be cautious about fearful dogs and the use of aversive so we don't make that worse.